Jackie, if you don't mind staying up here, and also invite Mark and Jeff to join us on the panel seats there, and
static one up there.
Hopefully we can answer some questions. I see a couple people lining up. Great.
So I'm not a scientist at all. I'm an agri-tourist, and I, a couple of years ago, did a fabulous tour of wild tea in Korea. And as an agri-tourist, I'm really interested in what's in the cup, more than, I'm not sure exactly what a microbe is. So one of the questions I have is, when we're thinking about small farmers growing tea, are the farmers also thinking about what the end product is? Because even if it's just oolongs that are fabulous, there's so many different oolongs. And when I traveled, and when I might travel in the future to the coast and see what's growing there, I'm going to be interested in a tea flight of oolongs and the identity of the farm. And is the farm creating a California tea identity, or a California Chinese American tea identity, or Sri Lankan American tea identity? And I'm just wondering if that's part of the discussion, because you were talking about the farmers need to think about marketing, and I'm the person that they're going to market to. So I'm kind of wondering about that aspect of the discussion.
One point I tried to make. One point I tried to make was that all of these different processes and potential products have many different versions, and then they're each multiplied by many different cultures. I see all of these as opportunities for small farms. That doesn't mean that an individual can go all these different routes. And even the Tuareg ceremony was one that I hadn't heard, and there's a Moroccan adaptation of it. So I just described these in a very general way, the different processes going to different tea options, because I just think those are tremendous opportunities for an individual farm to enrich the experience that they offer. But of course, it depends a lot on the growing conditions, the other types of activities on the farm, the preferences of the grower, and what the time and energy they have to direct to producing tea or harvesting tea or processing tea or marketing tea. So I think at this point in time, the richness that you described and that I think is apparent in the entire process just explodes really the opportunities that exist out there for tea agritourism on small farms.
I think from
Microphone.
Oh, is that on now? No. Yeah. I think from a, you noted in the beginning you're not a scientist, and you know, it's certainly the chemistry that gives the different flavors, and we know a lot about, from all these different growing regions of the world that you mentioned, there's tremendous work in knowing what the attributes of those teas will bring to the sensory experience. So I think that there is also an opportunity, just as we've done for wine here at UC Davis, to do the same, create the same kinds of tools, like the sensory wheels and things like that, for tea drinkers that would help you in your marketing aspect of things.
And I would just add, too, that I think, again, we're at the forefront of this in California. So our teas that are grown in the foothills going to be different than the ones grown up in higher elevations in the Sierras and almost at sea level in Kearney. Yes, they are going to be. So I think one of the beauties behind this, again, as Mark said, is just the diversity of the environments that we do have in California can really influence the type of teas that we'll be able to produce and the different quality. And I think that just really adds to the ability to create we have the Blossom Trail down in Fresno. If you're feel like getting in your car and driving 3 hours, it's a beautiful time to be driving around the Fresno area, because all these trees are blossoming. And we've made this kind of a destination point for people to come and see the different blossoms of, you know, almonds and apricots and peaches and nectarines. We could potentially do the same kind of thing in California. Start up in the Sierras, move your way down, and taste different teas depending on the region that you're in. So I think it really does have unique opportunities. Is it going to happen overnight? No. I mean, we've got a bit of a way to go before we get there, but I'm really excited about the possibility of being able to do that.
Me too, thank you.
Hey, I can go now. I was wondering, is tea an indeterminate plant? I mean, if you just let it keep growing, does it become a tree? And if it were a tree, would that be something interesting to look at in terms of harvest? Because most of the things I saw is the tea is kept very low, you know, and I'm sure it's because of the harvest, it keeps pushing it down. But what about this indeterminate nature of a tea plant?
This is the state of liabilities, so can you imagine climbing up and down a tree to harvest tea? Yeah, but I mean, Jackie's seen tree, I guess they're plantations, actually.
Yeah, tea farm. I mean, you know, there's another resource from tea, and that's the oil from the seeds. And so I've been on, you know, tea farms where they are just growing tea for the seeds. So I think that's something really interesting to look at as well, particularly for the health effects of the oils.
The plant itself can live for hundreds of years and can become 100 feet tall. They are pruned, of course, into these nice orderly rows to facilitate harvest and management. But it's not unusual to find, you know, instead of orderly rows, to find small naturalized groupings and everything in between.
Hi. You guys were talking about the microbiome. Oh, can you hear me? Okay. You guys were talking about the microbiome effect where the tea plant, once you drink it, could possibly be the microbes could possibly be transferred to the human biome. Do you think that boiling the tea would kill that, or would it be would it stay alive?
Thank you very much for your question. I wanted to make very clear it wasn't that necessarily the microbes would be transferred, but the chemicals that they were making.
Oh, I see.
So that the microbes we're studying are in the roots of the plant, and they produce chemicals that we believe, we're still doing these studies, that would travel to the leaves. So it's just the compounds that they're producing. That being said, if you ever see the production of tea, it's usually picked, often, you know, by hand picked. It's laid out on like a mat to wither a bit. There are lots of bugs and things like that that come around, fly around. But, you know, those get taken into the processing, and it gets very hot. So, yeah, that I don't think is a concern. We're actually more just like the chemical exchange.
Yeah, okay,
that's occurring.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Hi. Oh, never mind. Okay. I have a lot of questions, but I'll limit myself. I guess kind of my most important question is how is funding going for tea research? Like how, because I mean the NIH is, and the NSF has been, you know, gotten a really shrunken budget over the last few years from our government. So yeah, I'm wondering where's the funding coming from and where do you expect it to come from in the future?
Funding is a challenge. It's always been a challenge. You know, whenever you try something new, and these are challenging times, it hasn't hindered our progress because there's so many people that are excited about this, that they're, you know, we're all doing the most we can with the resources that we have. Of course, we need funding to move this to the next step, and so we're all dreaming that, hoping that, you know, by just plodding along, making progress, we can convince the funding agencies that this is worthy of funding. Thank you for your question.
The other thing is, really, I think we need to look at getting the different tea associations in the country to really start thinking about doing a checkoff program. If you look at most of agricultural research in the United States, much of that is supported by farmers, and that's usually done through a checkoff program. So, for instance, on the sorghum side, a sorghum farmer will commit a very, very small percentage of his or her income to the checkoff that is then used to help support research. So I think that's probably going to be a model that we want to look at in tea. And I think as more and more interest in tea develops, then you'll start seeing NIH getting involved because of the health benefits and wanting to study the health benefits, and then maybe some of the larger companies actually starting to participate as well. But I think initially we're going to have to see a groundswell from the tea farmers or people interested in tea in the United States to do that. And that could be through the importers or the sellers, and however that gets put together.
What you're referencing is really a chronic problem for small farms and small farm niche crops, which are at the heart of small farm agriculture, because small farms really depend upon these crops and these niche markets. But of course, small farm often translates to small market for a potential funding agency or a potential commodity group. And the niche crops that can be like blueberries in 2000 and 1996, there wasn't a California Blueberry Commission at that time because we didn't grow blueberries. So the new crops and alternative crops are chronically underfunded.
Knows eating whole grains is better for you. And when we started the council, I mean, one of the first things we ran into was really trying to find any science to back that up. And I think we're pretty much at the same place with tea. Everybody knows tea is good for you. The problem is when you try and go and find the science to back that up, it's very difficult to find. And again, to Jackie's point, it's just very expensive. I could give half of you some boiling water and the other half, and you'd all have to sign papers, and it costs lots of money. The UC Davis would have to get involved, and lawyers would have to get involved to, because now we're talking about human subjects. It's just not easy to do. But there is a lot of anecdotal evidence out there to suggest that tea is very good for you. We just have to get around to the science. And I think that's really important, and I think one of the foundational mandates of GTI is that we want to make everything science-based, right? We want to be able to put out things that are really backed by sound science. And that's going to be our challenge initially, is to really find that science and bring that science together and really articulate that.
You talked a lot about the research done. My question is, do you currently work with any tea farms, or do you have an evidence of how many tea farms are currently in California?
Yes, we're working with a handful of farms in California, in the northern part up here. Mark can speak to his collaborations. And we're also working with the tea research extension in Taiwan and in India, gaining a lot of help, experience from them that will be very important going forward. And we hope will increase our germplasm, so the number of different varieties that we'll have available here in California.
We just have a couple of sites where tea is established in the area where I work, but there are plans underway for new plantings. One thing that I tried to explain during my presentation was that as part of these different sites, we're establishing now additional tea varieties on each of the farms, commercial farms that are planted, and on some of the UC experimental farms. But there's a huge lag, because if you're starting from seed or even from clonal cutting material, it's 2 or 3 years out before the plant is well enough established to start sampling off of it. So we're talking about a pipeline that is 5 to 10 years long, I would think.
Thank you.
I want to caution you, not caution, I want you to take some attention about one other thing when you want to introduce tea in California. That is, there is one side of it is the growing part. The other side, which is so important to make quality tea, is the manufacturing part. So the manufacturing or the engineering part has to be really looked into, or maybe somebody from the engineering, or because you have already done it successfully for coffee. As a result, we get good coffee all over the world now, and I think we have a global tea institute. We can incorporate everybody into the, I think this is probably the first global association or initiative that can really incorporate all aspects of tea in the whole world. So I think we can bring in those people. But going back to this manufacturing thing is kind of important because I want you to take a lesson from what I thought has happened in Hawaii. I know there are some growers here. I cannot truthfully say that it has been a success story there. Growing part may have been successful. Where they ran into problems is manufacturing part or the engineering part. So it's absolutely not practicable for tea leaves to be sent to the East Coast for manufacture and so on and so forth. So there is an engineering component that has to come into play concurrently, because it's not like you have the plants will be ready in 2 years. What are you going to do? There's one small farm there, one small farm here, so you have to think of a good manufacturing process, and also the techniques of manufacturing really good teas. There's some work to be done there as well. So this is just a caution at the time of planning stage, because that is a crucial part of producing good teas.
Yeah, and just to comment on that, I think historically, if you look at UC Davis and actually Kearney, we've had excellent post-harvest research that's been done on many of the different specialty crops we work on. So there's a history of actually doing top-notch research on post-harvest technologies. So I think the system is in place to be able to develop those manufacturing strategies to ensure that the quality remains high. So that's, again, another great thing about working with the group here at Davis. And we do have a large post-harvest facility down at Kearney. We actually have a sensory lab at Kearney. And it's one of the few places around the state, or probably even the country, that has that kind of capability. So I think the research capabilities are there.
Actually, we're probably at the point at which wine was 50 years ago and olive oil was 20 years ago, and many of these other crops that have gone on to become very important in California had to go through these stepwise growing pains, for lack of a different term, because you can't get started on the post-harvest and processing work until you have sufficient plantings around, and you can't have sufficient plantings until you have sufficient germplasm and identify the sites where you can make long-term or get long-term commitments from either a university administrator or from the individual private grower, you know. So some of it's, all of these are part of the process. I'm sorry to say, it's messy now.
And that's the challenge of funding agriculture, right? Because agriculture just doesn't happen in 6 weeks. Again, I think that just introduces a whole new level of complexity that most other research doesn't run into.
And again, I think it's the small farmer that's going to be the most important component of that to help us get started. And actually, it's a tremendous joy to be working with the small farmers.
Thanks for taking my question. And my question's related to the, I guess, a farmers association and some sort of society for furthering tea growing in California. And so my question is this: do you have any suggestions around how a landowner might attract people who are interested to come into their property and farm tea on their property?
if you contact me, I can make your name and your circumstances, or I can give you a list of tea growers that I've been working with and tea enthusiasts. And hopefully the word will spread and you can share some common interests with that group.
Thank you.
I think that it's a really exciting model to pursue because, land cost in California is a big issue. So being able to work out the economics of doing something like that, I think would be a really important component going forward.
Thank you.
So this question might be a little premature given where this whole movement is at right now, but I'm just curious what you guys think about what we could look to in the history of the wine industry that's grown up in this area that might be similar, the model of that industry versus how it might look different with tea and what we might be able to learn from that, and that might, translate over in terms of culture and production and all of that.
For me personally, the wine endeavor in California has been a tremendous inspiration. Not only because so much of it was, started by independent-minded farmers who I think are very inspiring, and also how it's transformed over the years. From a scientific perspective, there have been really important considerations to happen. For example, viruses that have come in and attacked the plants. And so that we can learn from that. And actually, that's one of the main components of our platform going forward, is for the germplasm that we are introducing, to learn from the wine growers and assure that we won't run into those same types of problems. So I think science can help us a lot, in addition to the entrepreneurship of the 21st century farmer in California.
And I think the California oil industry is also another group to look at, because they've been very successful in really, pushing for international standards on olive oil, which, if you don't know anything about olive oil, is a real problem. But then, actually being able to differentiate the fact that the olive oil from California is truly extra virgin or follows, certain practices. I think we could do the same thing in California too. So I think we have some pretty good industries that we already have in place. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We could potentially, go to California olive and said, hey, what worked, what didn't? Where were your bottlenecks? And I think we can not have to go through some of the growing pains that a group like that did. But I think there's good models out there to do that.
And UC Davis is the place to do it. We have the Olive Center, we have viticulture and enology. So the great thing is we have colleagues with this kind of experience, and they're a part of this group as we go forward. They're a really important component.
When olives were first grown in California, they were considered by the rest of the world as industrial grade. And so it's really been in the last 20 years that a true olive oil appreciation and industry has evolved in California. Before that, it was just mass plantings of fairly mediocre oil.
We've got a couple more minutes left, so I guess we're taking the last question here for now.
Okay. I was just wondering if you guys have been doing any research about native California plants that you can either grow before planting tea or throughout its growing cycle to enrich nutrients, add a higher acid content to the soil, and just make them more prosperous?
All good questions, and no.
Well, actually,
we have a little bit.
So one of the farmers that we're working with, from their experience, is planting, cover crops. So even back in the 60s, they planted cover crops first. And so to enrich, in that case, it was to enrich, in both of these cases, it's to enrich the nitrogen content, because that was deemed to be really important in the production of the tea, back in the 60s. So the acidity, that's a good question. That would be really interesting to look at. But there again, I think that there's an opportunity for microbial communities to really help in those endeavors as well.
Cool, thank you.
Well, I think first of all, we want to thank all of our audience members for asking such wonderful questions. Our panelists have, their presentations and also their responses have really enriched the conference even up to now, and I know this is going to continue some more. So Jackie, did you have something?
I just wanted to announce that there are some food trucks outside for lunch, if you'd like to, for breaking for lunch. And short walks away is Davis downtown, so there's some nice places to have lunch down there as well. And we'll look forward to seeing you back here, I think, at 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock this afternoon. So thanks, everyone, for your great participation.
Thank you.
And then the students from the Global Tea Club and the first year seminar, we'd like you to join us with the Tea Advisory Committee for lunch. And the speakers also please join us for lunch. There are 2 separate rooms for our guests.